Now, I'm pretty sure you already know that some watches have porcelain dials. There's plated dials, sunburst dials, embossed dials, fading dials, sandwich dials, enamel dials, and porcelain dials. They're just another dial type, right? No. Watches with porcelain dials are rare. Very rare, in fact. Less than 1% of watches have porcelain dials. In fact, I think it's less than 0.01% of watches ever made have porcelain dials. And there's a lot of very good reasons for that. And in this video, I'm going to run through exactly why watches with porcelain dials are so special and expensive and very rare. Now, you're probably wondering what has prompted this video. Well, I'm actually going to make a couple of videos because I've been sent a watch with a porcelain dial. And I ended up going down the porcelain watch dial rabbit hole. I just wanted to learn everything there is to learn about porcelain watch dials because, well, they're not like any other dials made. And I don't think you can really review watches with porcelain dials until you really understand what goes into making them. You know, why are they so special? So I embarked on a journey of research and honestly, I was really quite surprised with what I found. Initially, I was quite surprised at the prices of the watches that I'd been sent, but after doing my research, I can totally understand why watches with porcelain dials are so expensive, and they are very expensive. Now, first, I think we need to understand what porcelain is. It's a type of clay, but with other stuff in it. And what you add to your mixture, well, that depends on what it is you want from the porcelain that you're sculpting. I mean, some porcelain is translucent, so you can, well, not really see through it, but light does penetrate through it. Some porcelain has bone in it, which makes it stronger. So I guess that's the first thing to understand, is not all porcelain is the same. And then I think we need to understand who it is that's making porcelain watch dials. Well, they're only made in 3 places around the world. And I'm not talking about 3 countries, I'm talking about 3 actual locations, 3 factories essentially. So if you're creating a watch and you want a porcelain dial, you're not left with many options. It's one of 3 basically. You've got a town in Germany that has a factory. It's called the Meissen factory. The town is called Meissen, and that is where a lot of Swiss brands and German brands get their porcelain watch dials made. Then you've got the Arita factory in Japan. That is where Seiko gets its porcelain dials made. And then you have a location in China, in Jingdezhen, China. I probably haven't said that right. And as you would expect, all 3 locations have a very long history of making porcelain items, not necessarily watch dials, because that's not all they make. In fact, it's probably a very tiny percentage of what they make. But yes, each of these locations will no doubt have hundreds of years of experience working with porcelain, but it was first used in China during the Tang dynasty between the years of 618 and 907, I believe. So they've had a few years to perfect the process. And if you're already thinking, oh, porcelain dials sound pretty good, I might have to pick up a watch with a porcelain dial, well, you're going to be limited for options and you're going to need a decent chunk of cash in your back pocket, especially if you want a Swiss-made watch with a porcelain dial. Rolex actually had a couple of watches with porcelain dials. A number of years ago, they made a Daytona with a porcelain dial and a Datejust as well, and I suspect they didn't make those porcelain dials themselves. I'm almost certain that process would have been outsourced. I know they don't outsource much at all these days, if anything. But yeah, I don't think Rolex set up a little mini porcelain dial manufacturing division at their manufacturing plants. The sort of knowledge and expertise and facilities that you need to make these dials is like nothing else. Seiko, I've already mentioned, they do make probably the most watches with porcelain dials. Credor have some very expensive watches with porcelain dials, and then you've got Glashütte, who have a range of watches, the Senator watches, and yes, some of these watches are tens of thousands of dollars. The Credor, I think, retails for $50,000. So why are so few watch manufacturers using porcelain dials? Well, Well, it's the manufacturing process. There is a lot of wastage. Yield rates are very, very low because it takes a long time to finish a watch with a porcelain dial. There are so many stages, and at each of these stages, porcelain dials get ruined, broken, cracked, damaged. So if you want to make 100 watches with porcelain dials, you're going to have to start by making 1,000 porcelain dials. And then if you're lucky, you'll end up with 100 good ones that you can use. In fact, I think the yield rate is even lower than that. Now, of course, the watches that I've been sent do have porcelain dials. That's why I'm making this video. Now, the second video that I'm going to produce is going to be much more of a review of the watches. I didn't want to fill that video up with all the information about porcelain and then just spend a small amount of time covering the specifications of the watches that I've been sent. So this is more of an introduction to porcelain, and then you will see a full review of the Halcyon watches that I've been sent. So yeah, I'm really from now on going to be talking about the manufacturing process that the factory in China has gone through to make the porcelain dials that are in the two watches that I've been sent. Now, the tolerances when it comes to the thickness are very, very tight. These dials are 1mm thick, and if they are plus minus 0.05 millimeters at any location on the dial, then they are scrapped. They have to be flat. Very flat. So once they've ended up with, well, a decent batch of dials that they can then start to paint, the artisans start painting, and these are highly trained, highly skilled artisans. And again, the failure rate at this stage is quite high because during the painting process they use enamel paint, and that paint changes color depending on how high the temperature is in the kiln when it's dried. So you can't just paint a dial with different colours, dry it and then put it in a watch. Each layer of paint, each colour is applied, then the dial is dried for hours in a kiln at a very specific temperature to turn that enamel paint to a very specific colour. Then those dials are removed, they're cooled, and then the next layer of paint can be added. And this process is done a minimum of 12 times. 12 times! And each time it's done, it's more than a day. And every time these dials are heated up and the enamel is dried, you get breakages, you get dials that get cracked and damaged, and you end up throwing more and more away. It's just mind-blowing. I had no idea what went into making these porcelain dials. Now, of course, if you're only going to put some black paint or black markers and a black text or logo on the dial, you've only got to do this process once, twice at best, I should imagine. But one of these watches that I've been sent in particular has a very detailed drawing on it with lots of colours, and yeah, I suspect these dials have taken a very long time to make. And of course, once the dials are finished, you've still got the matter of quality control checks, which I'm sure will result in more dials being taken out. And then you've got to actually use those dials during the assembly process, and I suspect some will be damaged and broken during that process. So I think we're really starting to see what goes into producing a watch with a porcelain dial and why they are as expensive as they are and as rare as they are. Why would you choose to make a watch with a porcelain dial and go through all of this? Well, because they're beautiful, they're rare, and it's hard. And quite often, that's why we do things. And I have to say, the watches that I've been sent, they really are mesmerising. You can see that these watches have porcelain dials. It's not something that's difficult to spot. And when you fully understand what goes into making these watches, I think you just appreciate them so much more. Now, there is a lot more to these watches than just the porcelain dials. For example, the cases are made of sterling silver. They've then plated it with rhodium, but they've chosen to use 64 grams of silver for each watch case because traditionally silver was used with porcelain. And that's all I'm going to tell you about these watches. Yeah, if you want to know more about the watches that I've been sent, you are going to have to come back and watch video number 2, volume 2, whatever you want to call it, and I will be reviewing the 2 watches that I have been sent. I'll run through everything you need to know. They are far more affordable than a lot of the Swiss-made and Japan-made watches containing porcelain dials, but As you can imagine, yeah, they're still not that cheap. But to find out more, make sure you come back and watch video number 2, the full review of the Halcyon watches that I have been sent. Right, guys, as always, a massive thank you from me to you for tuning in. I do appreciate it.